Comma rules. Rule number 3. Place commas after introductions in a sentence. Those introductions could be a word, a phrase, or a clause. Sometimes we introduce a sentence with a single word. For example, yes, I'm home. I would need to put a comma after that introduction. Yes, comma, I'm home. Or, regretfully, I won't make it to the party. Regretfully is the introduction to the sentence. Regretfully, comma. Sometimes we begin a sentence with a phrase or a group of words that does not have a subject or a verb. We might say, by the way, or on the other hand, or simply after dinner. After dinner, we'll watch a movie. If we begin a sentence with a phrase, we need to have a comma after it. After dinner, comma, we'll watch a movie. If I were to say, last but not least, what's the subject? What's the verb? There's not one, because it's a phrase. A phrase does not have a subject or a verb. It could be an expression or a prepositional phrase. A prepositional phrase has a preposition and an object of the preposition, something like under the table. There is no subject or verb. A clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. There are two kinds of clauses, independent clauses and dependent clauses. Independent clauses can be sentences on their own because they have a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. Dependent clauses depend on more information to make a complete sentence. They have a subject, a verb, but not a complete thought. An example of an independent clause could be, I got home late. I got home late has a subject and a verb and a complete thought. It could be a sentence by itself. If I added one word to the beginning such as because, I no longer have a complete thought. I still have a subject. I still have a verb. But if I said, because I got home late, you would be waiting on more information or depending on more information to have a complete sentence. This is a dependent clause because it depends on having an independent clause to make a sentence. I could say, because I got home late, I got in trouble. I would now have a dependent clause at the beginning of the sentence, followed by an independent clause. Remember that if a dependent clause comes at the beginning of a sentence, it is an introduction and you will use a comma after. However, if the dependent clause comes at the end of the sentence, it is not an introduction and you will not need a comma. This sentence has a comma after the dependent clause because the dependent clause is an introduction to the sentence. However, if I put the dependent clause at the end of the sentence, it would no longer be an introduction and I would not need a comma in the sentence at all. It would say, I got in trouble because I got home late. There's no introduction and no need for a comma in this sentence. There are many dependent words, or words that can be placed at the beginning of a clause that prevent the clause from being a sentence by itself, such as because, when, if, since, even though. When these words are placed at the beginning of a clause, you will have a dependent clause. To determine where to put the comma, if you have a dependent clause introducing a sentence, simply take off the dependent word or words at the beginning of the sentence, and where you would have had a period, put a comma. Show me Batman. What happened to Batman?
Even though he's strong, he still got hurt.
When David told us about Batman, he said that even though he is strong, he still got hurt. There's an introduction in this sentence. The introduction is a dependent clause, even though he is strong. This is a dependent clause because of the words even though. If I did not have the words even though, I would have two complete sentences. He is strong is a complete sentence. he still got hurt is a complete sentence. But because I have the words even though he is strong is not a complete thought. It does have a subject, it does have a verb, but it does not have a complete thought, which is what makes it a dependent clause. Because I have a dependent clause introducing the sentence, I need a comma after the dependent clause.
Were you ever told not to start a sentence with because? A lot of elementary school teachers tell their students to never start a sentence with because usually the students don't finish the sentence. That's a temporary rule just to help you when you're a kid. Of course, you can start a sentence with because. Because is the same type of word as when, if, or since. If you can start a sentence with if, you can start a sentence with because. Just make sure you finish the sentence.
But when it comes to using commas, when you have the word because, if you have because at the beginning of a sentence, you will have a comma in the sentence, not after the word because, but later in the sentence, after the dependent clause. If because comes in the middle of the sentence, you usually will not need a comma.
Now answer a few questions using the introductions rule for commas.
Our fourth rule is to place commas before and after unnecessary information. Imagine scoops. It's information that does not have to be in the sentence, so we could scoop it out and toss it away. If the sentence would be fine without it, we put commas before. Unnecessary information does not mean that it's not important. It only means that you don't have to have the information to have a complete sentence. It's still important, and you probably still want it there. What we're looking at is whether or not you have a complete sentence without it.
Sometimes we get interrupted. Sometimes we interrupt ourselves, and of course that can be scooped out of the sentence.
Certain words like however, though, or phrases like on the other hand often start a sentence as introductions and we place commas after them. Other times we use these same words to interrupt our sentences. For example, rather than saying sometimes we interrupt ourselves, I might want to say sometimes, however, we interrupt ourselves. I have just interrupted my sentence about interrupting. To interrupt a sentence, I need to put commas before and after because, of course, I could take out however and still have a complete sentence. Sometimes we interrupt ourselves. Sometimes, however, we interrupt ourselves. Insertions are similar to interrupters. Sometimes we insert extra information, and if that information is commonly known by most people, we should put commas before and after to indicate that it's unnecessary information. Disneyland, a major tourist attraction in Florida, has many discounts and promotions right now. Has anyone never heard of Disneyland? Does anyone not know that it's a major tourist attraction and even that it's in Florida? All of this information between the two commas could be scooped out and tossed away. We could simply say Disneyland has many discounts and promotions right now. However, I want to tell you that it's a major tourist attraction in Florida. Since I want it there, but don't have to have it there, I put commas before and after. Sometimes we talk to people and use their name in the sentence. Yes, Keisha, I see you. Always put commas before and after the name of a person spoken to. If I'm speaking to Sarah, I might say, "When you are 16, Sarah, you will get your driver's license." Because I'm speaking to Sarah, I put commas before and after her name. Since I am speaking to her, there is not likely to be confusion about who I'm talking to. There's not a big need to use her name, so I could take it out and say, "When you are 16, you will get your driver's license." However, because I want to put her name in there, I need to use commas before and after. These could be imagined like scoops. You could scoop out the information and toss it away, but you want it there, so put commas before and after.
If you do not use commas around additional information in a sentence, you are implying that the information is important and allowing the reader to make assumptions based on the lack of commas around the information.
My husband, Ammon, is great at sculpting. My husband and Ammon refer to the same person. I could take out Ammon and simply say my husband is great at sculpting. Therefore, because it's scoopable information, I have to put commas before and after his name. My husband is specific, referring to only one person. If I were to leave out the commas around my husband's name, it would imply that I needed to specify which husband I was referring to, which of course I only have one husband. So, to avoid implying false information, I have to use commas before and after my husband's name. Keisha is my only daughter. So if I were to refer to my daughter, everyone would know who I was talking about. If I did say her name, it would be extra information. I could put commas around her name because you would know who I was talking about without. Ephraim is my third son, so if I were to refer to Ephraim in a sentence and say, "My son Ephraim is very wiggly," I wouldn't have to use commas around his name. This rule does have a lot of variables, but the key to remember is that if you have extra information in the sentence that could be taken out and still have a complete sentence, put commas before and after. Now answer a few more questions to see if you've understood the last comma rule.
Hopefully you did well on all of the questions throughout this e-learning lecture. Thank you for taking the class, and I hope that you'll be able to use these rules in all of your classes and in